In your engagement interview,
Orchestrated reality show.
When you try to prove that you're good and that you're not the person they say you are, you're taking the bait. You're feeding the beast.
I don't think Netflix likes Harry and Meghan very much. I've been revisiting their 2022 Netflix documentary and it is packed full with hilarious, ironic moments. So let's talk about them. Hi everyone, I'm Rosie Blythe. I'm the author of the Princess Guide to Life book series, and on this channel we talk about everything from finances to books to dogs. And today it's part 2 of revisiting the Netflix documentary that Harry and Meghan made back in 2022 and all of the funny, ironic moments that they accidentally immortalised. So this moment, I think, did more to damage Meghan's reputation than anything else. I think this was the moment where people were really like, she disrespected the Queen. No, we are not having that.
I remember we're in the car and driving up and he said, "You know how to curtsy, right?" And I just thought it was a joke. Now I'm starting to realize this is a big deal. I mean, Americans will understand this. We have medieval times, dinner and tournament. It was like that. Like I curtsied as though I was like, "Pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty."
So she does this whole like, oh, Americans will get this. It's like medieval times. And she likens it to this sort of slightly ridiculous fantasy, fictional thing. Which, you know, to some extent, yeah, it is silly, like curtsying to another human being. But, you know, all sorts of customs are weird. And the really ironic part of this is that she wants to paint herself as this political kind of person. You know, she's like, oh, I used to work for the UN. I've travelled here. I've done this.
At Northwestern, I had double majored in theater and international relations.
And then she shows this disrespect for a local custom that I don't think she would get away with in any other culture. Like if you're visiting another country and you're meeting with, you know, the royal family there or the leader of whatever, you're not going to be like, that's a weird custom. That would be completely socially and politically unacceptable, but Meghan thinks it's fine when she does it. If she had gone to, I don't know, Nigeria, and there was a particular custom that you did when you met the leader of Nigeria, would she have been like, oh, I thought that was a joke? Would she have said that? No, she would not. I don't think she would actually have said this about any other culture, but for some reason she figured, oh, Britain, that's fair game. And let's not forget that the royal family have to basically be good sports and do things when they're visiting other countries that they probably know they're going to take some ribbing about from their friends at home. For instance, when visiting New Zealand, they all take part in this nose-rubbing greeting, which I think most people would feel awkward about when you're not used to it. I think the bare bottom makes up for it slightly. But I think this is where Meghan proves that she was totally out of her depth when it came to the royal family. She just didn't have what it takes. But of course, the ironic part of this is something that we can now appreciate more watching these shows in retrospect, because we now know that Meghan doesn't mind a little bit of pomp and circumstance if she is the recipient. Because she famously has herself announced even when there is no one there. And that, my friends, is ridiculous. Meghan is all about the double standards, isn't she? Because you can make fun of the royal family having ridiculous rituals if you then also say, oh, no titles for me, just call me Meg, it's fine. Or you can respect those rituals and receive them yourself and be announced as the Duchess of Sussex. But you know what? You can't do both. So I think one of the most ironic things about Meghan's entire life trajectory is that she was complaining about things being bad when they really weren't that bad. Things have got so much worse for her since she left the royal family.
Meghan, how are you feeling?
At that point, I was still very much believing what I was being told, which was, it will pass, it will get better. It's just what they do right at the very beginning. Of course it'll get better. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how good I was, no matter what I did, they were still going to find a way to destroy me.
I'm not sure which words I'm allowed to say on YouTube, but she was talking about ending it all, shall we say. And I'm not going to delve too deeply into somebody else's mental health, I wouldn't talk about that lightly. But I think what is ironic about this is that the press is so much worse now than it ever was then. And I think Harry always takes offence at this idea that, oh, everyone has to put up with it. But everyone does. That is just part and parcel of being famous, whether you're famous for being in the royal family or famous for being, you know, an actor, a musician, a writer, an artist, whatever. Not all of the press is going to be 100% positive. That is just a fact of life. The sooner you get over that, the sooner you can just get on with it.
If you look back at the press from this time, yeah, there are some bitchy headlines about her, but we can have confidence that all the negative stories released at the time will have been collected for this Netflix show. And these days, every time she posts on Instagram, the picture will be analysed, and not kindly. Every time she makes an appearance, she is absolutely ripped apart. And it makes these first few headlines look positively tame in comparison. She really didn't know how good she had it.
So you're sort of forced to conclude that if she was feeling like ending it all back then, but she isn't now, then it's not actually due to the external circumstances of how good or bad the press coverage is. It's more to do with her own internal mental health. So she's blaming the press for how she felt, but they're not actually responsible for it, because now she consistently comes out in these lists of, you know, least popular celebrity. And back then, she could have brought it back. She could have just been like, oh, well, I'm going to, you know, do what Catherine did and just be stoic and not complain and just get on with it. And in the end, if you do that long enough, people will end up loving you. But she chose to take a different path. So it's about time we heard from Harry. I think maybe the most ironic line in the entire show. And the fact that he said this out loud on camera tells you how little self-awareness he has.
It's amazing what people will do when offered a huge amount of money. 50,000, 100,000 to hand over photographs, to create a story.
What was the Netflix deal again? It was pretty big, wasn't it? Harry, what were you thinking? Saying this out loud, you Wally.
He also laments the fact that his dad and brother won't apologise or be accountable. For what, though? For being heir to the throne when Harry isn't? Harry can't exactly preach about accountability when he deflects every criticism and will never answer for the seeds of destruction he's sown within his family.
I've had to make peace with the fact that probably never going to get genuine accountability or a genuine apology. You know, my wife and I we're moving on. We're focused on what's coming next.
Meg and I would always sign off on our texts. Love wins. Love won.
I'm going to apologise in advance if you are someone who signs off your texts in any of these ways. But for me, somebody saying, ending a text or an email or whatever with "love wins" would just make me die of cringe. I don't think I would be able to respond to that person. There's just something so cringy and performative about it, and so ironic, because I don't know if you've found this, and again, apologies if this is something that you do, I'm sure you're lovely, but when people sign off with like love and light, they are always the worst people you've ever encountered in your life. It's a bit like what I was saying in the last video. What people tell you about themselves is never true, but that's what they want you to believe about them. So if someone signs off things with something like love wins, what they're saying is, I want you to believe I am that kind of person who, you know, love is so important to me. Love is the opposite of hate, and I'm not a hater. And it's all of this stuff, and it's like, you don't need to say that. If you're actually doing good, you just do it. And it's just apparent, and nobody needs to whack a label on it. And I think we've seen enough of Meghan now that we know love is not actually central in her life. Moaning and bitching is.
And just to delve a little bit deeper into this, Meghan tells this story about someone explaining the royal family to her, that they were like a fish swimming along happily until this alien organism joins it and they don't like it.
Like this fish is like swimming perfectly powerful, it's on the right current. And then one day this little organism comes in. This foreign organism. And the entire thing goes, what is that? What is it doing here? It doesn't look like us. It doesn't move like us. We don't like it. Get it off of us.
And I'm just like, what is she talking about? The royal family was super welcoming to her and actually made unprecedented moves to make her feel part of the family. She was the first unmarried partner to be officially invited to their Christmas at Sandringham. The Queen took her out on an engagement just weeks after she married Harry. They did everything they could to make her feel accepted, and none of it was ever good enough, and she blamed them for any negative press. And her dad made the terrible mistake of selling pictures to Paps, which, yeah, is a mistake, but he's been completely cut off forever. She no longer has a father. There's zero forgiveness or grace, and that is the exact opposite of love. She's also said she always wanted a big family.
You know, when I look back at my own childhood, it was great, but I just remember feeling alone a lot.
And we cut to Archie, alone. The ironic thing is that the more Meghan talks about what she wanted, the more you see she's created a life with the exact opposite of those wishes for her own children.
I just wanted all these cousins and these people. I just wanted all of that. And I didn't have that big family. So when I was pregnant with Archie, I was just so excited that we were going to be able to create for him that thing that I had always wanted.
So why has she cut most of them off? It's Harry's entire family, 95% of her family. She's got uncles, aunts, cousins on her mum's side. Where are they? Not invited to the wedding, not hanging out with Archie and Lily. So she clearly doesn't value family at all. So this is really interesting. They talk about the Australia tour being the sort of catalyst and the beginning of the end when everything started going wrong. And it was too good. You guys, she was too good at the job. That's why she couldn't do it.
The Duchess of Sussex arrived hand in hand with her husband.
It went so well. Like, it seemed to be amazing. And then I don't understand what happened after that.
I think Australia was a real turning point because they were so popular with the public. The internals at the palace were incredibly threatened by that.
Putting aside what I think about her, right? She's becoming a royal rock star. Bigger, I would argue, as a couple than William and Kate. That's probably not a good thing in the long term.
The issue is when someone who's marrying in, who should be a supporting act, is then stealing the limelight or is doing the job better than the person who was born to do this. That upsets people. It shifts the balance. Because you've been led to believe that the only way that your charities can succeed and the only way that your reputation can be grown or improved is if you're on the front pages of those newspapers. But the media are the ones who choose who to put on the front page.
So Harry has always seemed to claim that the royals control the media to some extent, but here he's saying the media was choosing who to put on the front page, and this upset the royal family, so that's confusing. But also, we just see the headlines about Meghan being a diva, as if that proves the stories were just planted to make her sound bad. But the actual stories at the time had quite a few details about things she did in Australia, like allegedly throwing cups of tea in anger. So you can interpret it either as the tour was so fantastic that the royal family had no choice but to start making Meghan less popular, even though she was part of the royal family and that would also reflect badly on them, or this was Harry and Meghan's first tour and the first time Meghan and her staff had to deal with the daily stresses that would involve, and stories leaked because members of the press actually witnessed things like staff being reduced to tears. So we have these headlines showing stories about Meghan being a diva, and obviously it's always a sort of he said, she said type situation when people are recounting what happened, but I think, in my opinion, she sounded a little bit like a diva on that particular tour. Also, at the time, the vast majority of the negative stories were actually coming from Meghan's own family, mostly her dad and her sister. And I think if they were somehow on the royal family's payroll, that wouldn't have stayed a secret. So we have the situation where Meghan's family was bad-mouthing her to the press, and this is somehow transformed into the royal family criticising Meghan because they were scared because she was too good at being a royal person. And we also have this Meghan sort of saying like, oh, you know, I assumed that people knew that tabloids weren't true, which is quite a clever way of casting anyone who believes something that they've read in the paper is just, oh, I'm so sorry, but you're just so dumb.
It's still been under the delusion that if it was in a tabloid, no one believed it. Like, it's a tabloid. And then we had a walkabout in Liverpool, and there was a group of women, and one of them said to me, what you're doing to your father's not right. It was the first time that I went, oh my God, people actually believe this stuff. And then my entire center was rocked to its core.
But then she talks about someone coming up to her in a crowd and saying like, oh, it's wrong what you did to your father. And it's like, that's her father speaking to the press. They're not making up lies. They're literally reporting what he's told them. So Meghan is sort of somehow claiming that the tabloids are just like making stuff up when it's quotes from her father.
And this might actually be a good time to point out that the law around this is completely different whether you're in the US or the UK. Laws are much stricter in the UK, but she's probably hoping you don't know that. So you'll assume the trashy newspapers in the UK would be on par with like the National Enquirer, when in reality they have to adhere to much tighter rules about what they're allowed to publish.
So they talk about their plan being to go and live in Canada, keep doing, you know, royal appearances and stuff and working, representing the Queen, but not being part of the royal rota. And they were going to fund themselves.
So at the end of December and the beginning of January, I've been on the phone to my father saying, we've got a plan.
What if we move to Canada?
We thought it would be good to give ourselves some breathing space, but also we were really passionate about continuing our work throughout the Commonwealth to support the Queen.
Well, and also I think what's important is the pack of the Royal Rota is based there in London. So if we're not there, they can't cover what we're doing. You guys can be on the front pages of all the papers, you can have it exactly the way you want it, and we can just go about doing the work in the name of the Queen.
If you want us to go and do things on behalf of the Queen, we'll go and do it. And we'll pay for it ourselves. We don't want to be dependent on any taxpayer funding. Guess what? You get us, but you get us for free. And this was years in the making. We really wanted to remove the supposed public interest argument that the press had over every element of our lives. Their argument was if you have even 1% of public funding any part of your life, then we can basically claim public interest. We can invade your privacy on everything because you have public funds supporting you.
The Netflix and the Spotify of it all, that was never part of the plan.
Yeah, because you didn't have a plan.
We didn't have a plan. That was suggested by somebody else by the point of where my family literally cut me off financially, and I had to afford security for us.
Wait, hold up, wait a minute. Your family cut you off?
Yeah, in the first quarter of 2020. But I've got what my mum left me, and without that, we would not have been able to do this.
First ironic thing, if they were happy to fund themselves, why did Harry make such a big deal about moaning that he'd been cut off? Like, you said you wanted to be cut off and fund yourself, so what's the problem when that happens? And maybe I don't understand this, but I feel like maybe Harry doesn't understand this because he talks about not having public funding. But where does he think the royal family get their money from? Like, the money that Charles is going to give to him, where has that come from?
It's actually pretty interesting. If you look into it, most of the royal family's money comes from this sovereign grant, which is basically money generated by land that belongs to the state, not the family themselves. So that's clearly public funding. But then much of their private funding comes from the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall, which is land they own themselves and then rent out, essentially. But how that land came to be in their possession and who they rented out to is actually quite a bone of contention. There is a whole Dispatches documentary about it in YouTube, which I'll link below. Basically, you could argue that their entire fortune depends on the UK taxpayer in one way or another. I know Charles sells his jam at Highgrove, but that's not going to keep him in ermine and pearls for long. I think this might be my favourite one. So they were planning to live in Africa. Yeah, Meghan was thrilled about that. She couldn't wait.
We discussed the whole concept of us moving to South Africa, supporting charities, organisations in Africa.
The job is a lot of cause-driven work. So I thought, well, this is great.
Hear the call of the hippos when she's making her coffee in the morning. What could be nicer? That was just her ideal life. She could not wait to get back there. The royal family have signed off on this, but then it leaks. So they can't do it now.
The palace signed off on us moving to South Africa. So my father's office knew about it, my brother's office knew about it, and my grandmother's office knew about it. No one else knew. It was very much an internal document. Then it was leaked to the Times newspaper. And then that whole plan was then scrapped because it's now become a public debate. Once plans like that become public debates, 9 times out of 10, it's going to fail.
It's so funny to me. It's so funny that Harry, sometimes watching this, it's like, you know, when you read like a novel and the narrator is someone that you, like, as you read along, you realise that you're understanding stuff more than the narrator does, and it's like that's the kind of like the joke, that like they're really naive. I feel like that with Harry a lot of the time, because let's face it, Meghan was never going to move to Africa. Living in Africa was not on her to-do list at all whatsoever. It was never going to happen. So like, I would just love to be a fly on the wall when they're having these conversations. Harry blames the royal family. I don't think it was them who leaked it. I don't think it was them who scuppered that plan. And he talks about it like sort of being like, oh, a public debate. I don't think anyone would have really had that much interest in where they lived as non-working royals. I don't think the British public would have been particularly bothered about which continent they lived on. But yeah, the idea that Meghan was going to live in Africa just cracks me up every single time. And they claim that they would have been willing to relinquish their Sussex titles. I don't think they would, because they haven't yet, have they?
Okay, Canada. I was speaking to my father. This is the plan. And he says, can you put them in writing? And I said, I'd rather not, because of what happened last time. He says, I can't do anything unless you put it in writing. So I put it in writing, sent him emails on the 1st and the 2nd and the 3rd of January. And in one of those, I'd mentioned that, you know, if this wasn't going to work out, then we would be willing to relinquish our Sussex titles if need be. So that was
the plan.
That was the plan.
They're now using them to publicise Meghan's business, or Meghan is using them. So, and this was a real bone of contention. It was the one thing the Queen said nope to, said absolutely not, you cannot use your titles to make money, because how vulgar, really.
Now, to be fair, it's a grey area rather than a blatant cash grab. This gift basket sent to Jamie Kern-Lima was featured in the video of their podcast together. So this was defended at the time that it was just a private gift to a friend, but the basket included homemade strawberry sauce, so you could certainly argue that it's there to promote her business, which sells items like this. Also, people claim she used Archie and Lily's titles to promote the candles named after them. But if you look at the website, they don't have their titles there. So I tracked down this rumour to a People article where they unequivocally claim that the titles were mentioned in the press materials. So I think the feeling is that Meghan is edging ever closer to using those titles for commercial gain and is just starting to push at the boundaries of those rules.
Another favourite moment. There are so many moments in this which I just think are hilarious, but this is one where the first time I watched it I was like, oh, Netflix is letting them, just giving them enough rope to hang themselves.
What is transpiring in the media, what's being created, is an illusion. When you try to prove that you're good and that you're not the person they say you are, you're taking the bait, you're feeding the beast. It is an illusion. Your work is not to prove your goodness. You know who you are, both of you. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes.
And they've got this, obviously a personalised for them meditation about like not letting people get to them and not having to prove themselves, and then they film themselves meditating along to this thing and put it on their Netflix show, which is the whole premise is we want to tell you all about ourselves and prove that we're not the ones in the wrong. So yeah, that's very funny to me. It's beyond parody. It's like something I would put in a spoof movie about people like this. Unbelievable that they allowed this to, it just tells you what Harry and Meghan's intellectual level is like, that they allowed this to be filmed and made as part of the documentary. They probably even filmed it themselves. Anyway, that is enough for part 2. It's enough to chew on, isn't it? So look out for part 3 coming very soon. Thank you for hanging out with me today and giving me the opportunity to vent my spleen about this stuff, because it's so funny to me. Thank you for liking the video, thank you for subscribing to the channel, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Toodaloo!